Welcome back, Flyers Nitty Gritty fans, to Getting Gritty with It with your host, Yariv, Wolok, my partner in crime, as always, Vasili, Gianarakos, my friend. How are you?
I'm doing really well, Yariv. We finally have some Flyers preseason hockey. Last time everybody's, listened in, we were kind of doing a rookie camp breakdown and some rookie games essentially, and now we're actually getting into the thick of training camp, and that's begun. And preseason games up until the regular season starts here. So there's a lot to talk about, a lot to break down, a lot of Flyers news in general. So we have a full topic list, and I'm excited to get into it. How you doing, my friend?
I'm doing well, dude. You're absolutely right. We got a lot to talk about. We got a game to recap. We got a bunch of stuff from training camp and all this stuff. It is exciting. It's here. We no longer have to talk about upcoming games. We finally have one game in the books. It's only a preseason game, but still, we have real hockey, and we have Sean Couturier to talk about. And God, does that feel sweet to say? I gotta say, it's so excited.
Yeah, I think he hasn't played a game, in 686 days. I think the NHL tweeted that out, which is crazy to think about. That's how long it's been. And I think it's great, obviously, just to see Coots back on the ice and, see him kind of work his magic out there. Obviously, the Flyers didn't get the best result, but we'll get into that as we go along.
There's a lot of nuance within that conversation. So I do think we're going to want to get into it. And again, just a reminder, those who are listening, there was a video that I was able to make without Vasili just for a pre-game session. Vasili was working, so I just popped on myself and just did a quick video. You can check that out. It went up yesterday just for the pre-game highlights. I did nail some of the line combination mix-ups and stuff like that, so it's pretty good. And we'll go through a lot more today. Before we get started, do our usual little spiel here. Please remember to like, subscribe, share, hit the bell for the notifications, continue to leave comments. You guys are amazing. All of that is tremendous, and we love you for it. And I even saw a rating on iTunes the other day. So thank you all so much. It's awesome. Please continue to do that. It helps grow our show so much. Our goal is to hit 1,000 subscribers. It's when our show will hit the next level, and we are inching our way over there. So any more support, and if you're listening and you're not subscribed, please subscribe. It'd be awesome. We would tremendously appreciate it. Also, a shout out to our sponsor, Jim Steaks on 4th and South. Make sure to check them out. I think they're not open yet. I keep forgetting to double check, but last time I checked, they're still not open, but they should be opening relatively soon after their fire. So keep them in your hearts and minds, and make sure to get a cheesesteak from Jim Steaks when you're ready, when they are ready. Sorry. And we got a lot to talk about. So first and foremost, our topic list, we're going to talk a little bit about Michkov. We're going to give some training camp updates. We'll do a recap of the Devils Flyers game from yesterday, the preseason loss. We're going to talk a little bit of update on Bjarnason. We had some cuts today. And then we're going to talk a little bit about the bubble players and, who we expect maybe to make a showing kind of moving forward. So let's get into it. So first thing, just this news came out several days ago, but I wanted to make sure we talked about it anyway. And one thing that I thought was really interesting, we knew that Matvei Michkov said that he didn't want to go to Sochi at one point. He did fire his agent after going to Sochi. Now he does have 5 points in 5 games, 2 goals, 3 assists, and a +3 rating. So he's doing well. I believe they won again today. He didn't have any points today, but he did have a monster hit. He was playing physical. He was definitely an impact in that game, still playing top 6 minutes for them. But it turns out that he actually wanted to go to Dynamo Minsk and didn't end up going there. And that's probably why he's fired his agent.
Yeah, that makes total sense. I mean, obviously, if you're a player and you're trying to pick a spot for yourself to land in this loan transfer situation that he was in, your agent not coming through for you in that scenario would lead to, a firing of this kind of nature that went on. Michkov ultimately goes to HC Sochi. I mean, maybe though it's a blessing in disguise because Dynamo Minsk is the last team in their division right now in the KHL. And HC Sochi is 3rd in their division. So it seems like the team he's on currently is performing better than Dynamo Minsk, and looks like there might be more talent on that roster than Dynamo's team. So it could be a good thing for Michkov's development in general. From his game today, I'll read his full stat line out, just for anybody who didn't have a chance to check out the game, or for anybody who hasn't seen this. But he had 19 total shifts, 13:55 total time on ice, and that's 34 seconds of power play time as well. There, 4 shots on goal. One block shot, 3 hits. One of those hits being a huge hit, literally bodying a guy behind the net to free up the puck. And then Michkov passes the puck out front and sets his teammate up in the slot for a glorious scoring chance. And then another interesting stat is he traveled a total of 3.35 kilometers on the ice in this game, and that's a stat that the KHL tracks, which I always think is fun. But yeah, there's just one shift in this game that really stands out, right? Where Michkov, he blocks a shot in his own defensive zone. He recovers the puck from that block shot. Then they rush the puck up the ice. He recovers the dump in from the rush with that big hit that I just alluded to, essentially knocking the defenseman straight into the boards. And then with that, he sets his teammate up in the slot for like a grade A chance. So it just shows that, there's several facets to his game, right? Everybody knows that he's a really great shooter and he's great offensively, but you see the little habits in his game come out on a play like that where he has a block shot. He can anticipate a dump and then he chases the dump and puts together an aggressive forecheck, puts a hit on the defenseman, and then frees a puck up and sets up his teammate for a chance. So it just shows that, with a player like Michkov, there's so many different little facets to his game. It just shows how smart of a player he is really on the ice to kind of be able to contribute in all these different ways for HC Sochi.
Yeah, absolutely. And, I keep talking about, seeing him at center too, because I'm kind of obsessed with the idea of finding a number one center, whether it be Michkov or Couturier or it's a guy being drafted. But, the defensive game is something he'd have to work on. And if you look at that play, I mean, that's a John Tortorella kind of play right there. So
100%, yeah.
You show that clip to John Tortorella, I think he'd be pretty happy with that. So there is a good chance that he's going to come over with Tortorella being a coach here, potentially, right? We don't know, especially because we don't know exactly when he's coming over. But I love to see that stuff because that's the one thing I want to make sure when we get a player like this. I've seen the comparison of Pavel Datsyuk. People have even pointed out to me. We talked about it on this podcast immediately. I think he's more of a shooter than Datsyuk, but he definitely skates around the net like Datsyuk. And Datsyuk was a phenomenal two-way player, absolutely phenomenal. In the veins of like Sergei Fedorov level. So if Michkov can become that kind of player that can be elite at both ends of the ice, I mean, that would be tremendous. I don't expect him to be elite defensively. I do expect it elite offensively, but if he can improve his defensive game over in Russia and show more of that, I think it only makes him a more valuable player. But he's such a competitor that shift doesn't surprise me at all.
No, definitely not. And he's obviously such a smart player. If you just look at his positioning, like he knows where to be on the ice to first off make that block, be in the right position to make that hit. And just in general, right? Like his hockey IQ has always been something that's highly touted. So I think when you have such a smart player, he's only bound to, develop the other little pieces of his game that might not be up to par with, let's say, like his offensive skills, at least on the defensive side of things. So it's going to be interesting to see how he continues to develop with HC Sochi. Like still 5 points in 5 games for him to start off. And I mean, for his age in that league, I mean, that's a tremendous start.
So. Anytime you're a point per game player in that league, you're elite. Hopefully he can sustain that the whole season. I suspect that he will. The other thing, I just want to comment on the Dynamo Minsk thing. Like, obviously, going back to Sochi was a traumatic experience for him because, his father died while he was over playing for that team and he died in that city. And I'm not an expert on this, but if you're trying to get over trauma, a lot of the best solutions for it are exposure. So maybe in the long run, this will be something that'll help him heal from that situation. That's the only thing I'll say, but I don't know what's best for him with that. I think that's more up to him and his family. So I do understand, but maybe in the long run, this will be what's best anyway.
Yeah, that's a great point to make there, Yariv.
Yeah. All right, let's get into Flyers related stuff, or at least the current Flyers that are here right now. So just training camp updates. I had some time to spend. I spent some time at training camp on site the other day, and it was awesome. And got to hang out with Jim Jackson and Al Morgahini and Todd Fedoruk was there, and all these people. It's always fun. I was talking to Charlie O'Connor a lot and Jordan Hall. So I had a great experience. But some news came out of training camp that I don't think a lot of people were aware of. A big one specifically to Travis Sanheim, and we didn't really talk about this because nobody really knew, but apparently Travis Sanheim had a fractured foot at some point over the summer, last summer, and during his World Junior Championships, and all through the months of June, he was recovering rather than getting ready for the season. And if you look at the upcoming season, maybe that, or the past season, maybe that kind of halted his progress in the offseason, his preparation for John Tortorella, and potentially kind of spiraled him into something, he's a very confidence-led player. And if he doesn't come in feeling 100% confident, maybe that affected him. I thought it was really interesting about that. And I guess before we get to the second part about where he's going to be playing, what do you think about the fractured foot situation?
Well, yeah, he revealed that in an interview, I believe after one of the scrimmages for training camp, and I thought it was really interesting that we didn't get any news or any wind of that last season whatsoever. Maybe the team or himself, for some reason, didn't want to reveal that with a new coach coming in. They didn't want to, put the onus on him and basically say, oh, like this is why, I'm having a slow start or struggling. So maybe that's why it wasn't revealed. I'm really not sure, but I thought when you look at any injury, especially a foot injury where like that can affect your training because you really can't do anything in terms of your skating or cardio or really conditioning. I think Sanheim mentioned that he didn't get to really start his usual training till 6 weeks after that he initially planned. So, I mean, right. That can affect any player.
Huge.
Yeah, in terms of just trying to get ready for the upcoming season and get ready for a new coach. So, I mean, Sanheim mentioned himself in that media availability that he didn't want to use that as an excuse for his poor play last season. But I mean, I think you have to objectively point to that and say, well, it probably affected his ability to get ready as he normally would for, an NHL regular season. Like, obviously, he didn't get to do everything that he wanted to do training wise last summer compared to, his regimen this summer, based on what he said. So I think it's an interesting tidbit, and I wonder, if that really was a huge effect on his play last year. I'm really interested to see Sanheim coming up here to begin this season, especially with the fact that the staff and Tortorella looks like they're going to be trying him on the right side, which I was kind of surprised about, considering, you remove Provorov, a left-hand defenseman. You'd assume that Sanheim would move up into his role there just based on his, tenure with the team. But it's encouraging that Sanheim as a veteran's open to that, right? Because like he's one of the most experienced defensemen on the team, and he could easily have said, "Hey, well, I'm not comfortable doing that, so I don't want to play, right side defense." But he's embraced that, so it kind of just shows maybe another leadership aspect. But I know with the Calgary Hitmen, he actually played on the right side quite a bit. And Sanheim mentioned himself, I think people have heard already probably that he's very comfortable on the right side, and that actually he sees certain offensive opportunities and certain things in the offensive zone a lot better actually from the right side versus the left side. So I thought that in general was just very interesting, from the injury to just potentially being on the right side to begin here.
Yeah, no, absolutely. So just to add before I comment on the right side, I did find it just watching Sanheim at training camp, he does look stronger, faster. He looked good. He looked very good, actually. I know there was a highlight going around of him making a skate. I know that pissed people off. Whatever. I don't care. And I like the guy who had the I'm not going to pick on him here because he's a friend of mine, so I'm not going to pick on him. I don't care. But I did not see that from Sanheim. I saw a player who did look more prepared for the season. He looked really happy in his interviews. He doesn't seem fazed by it. It seems like maybe his relationship with Tortorella is improving. And you even saw that where Tortorella kind of called out his name in a positive way, saying he looks stronger, he looks faster. And I think it's a reflection of him having that full off season, which, we don't think about that as fans, but I think it is extremely important in the preparation for training camp where you make that first impression on the coach coming into the season. And I think that adds to the right side confidence. And I think there's a lot to that right side. If you look at the Flyers defense and you look at the names that are in there, like the only other right-handed defender that we have at the NHL level is Sean Walker. And Walker doesn't necessarily project to be a top four defenseman. I don't think the Flyers are jumping to play him there, even though he played with York. We'll talk about that. But you look at the top four, if Sanheim is playing on the right, potentially, one, does he play with York? I'm not certain. I think he'll probably play with Ristolainen.
Similar styles between them, right?
Right, so. Yeah. But I do think about the left side defensemen. They're all kind of thumpers. Even Walker is a little less of a thumper, but you think about like even Sealer and Stahl, or even like Zamula isn't, but you look at even Zamula and Emil Andre, who are younger, there's an incentive to open up that left side and to move Sanheim to the right side. And not just that, this is a guy, you mentioned the Calgary Hitmen. He was an offensive defenseman for Calgary. Like, he led their offense. He was driving play every time. He is a fast skating defenseman. I think, it's an opportunity here to potentially unlock his offensive abilities. And if you look at Tortorella's history with guys like Werenski, with guys like Seth Jones, he's had that ability before. So, I don't know if it's going to go all season. Torch said this is the time to take a look at it. And I think he's absolutely right. Because if you can get him playing well on the right side, maybe he plays with Stahl, maybe he plays with Andre, maybe he plays with Zamula, right? The opportunity to put one of the kids there, or a Mark Stahl who had a history of playing with Brandon Montour and bringing out his game, right? It was Montour, right?
Yeah.
Yep. Brandon Montour. You look at that reputation that Stahl has built. I mentioned this in the offseason, like, that is a guy that you potentially would want with a guy who needs a little bit of confidence. It's a guy who is extremely stable. And all of a sudden, you can allow Sanheim to be the more offensive role there and take risks. And we keep hearing that all offseason. And, they might just want to get more offense out of him. And if he's coming in on the offhand side, that does open him up to more offensive opportunities. Defensively, be a little tougher, but like you said, he's experienced.
Yeah, exactly. That's the only caveat, right? Like, obviously, the offense opens up for him on that right side, according to him. But I mean, as a defenseman, you trying to retrieve pucks with your offhand on the right side, that'll make it more difficult. So I'm really interested to just see him in action in the first preseason game here. I'm unsure. I mean, if that's going to be, today when all of you are listening to this on the Wednesday. But we'll see. I'd imagine, he's going to get into a game here soon, and we'll get to see him on the right side and what he looks like. But it's really an interesting development. Obviously, I mean, you lose a lot of offense with D'Angelo leaving the defense corps. Obviously, you lose Provorov as well. So that has to be made up in some sense. And I mean, if you do have Sanheim on the right side, it does add depth to your right-hand defense, because like you said, Yariv, like Sean Walker in the past hasn't been a bona fide top 4 guy in the league. Like, he has played those minutes, but he hasn't been a steady, solidified presence in that type of role. So, I mean, if you can run with, Ristolainen and Sanheim on your right side, it does make the defense have a different look to it, but it also adds more depth to it as well. And we've said kind of throughout the offseason here that if you look at the defense, there doesn't seem to be a lot of depth. So maybe this is kind of a way that they create that in-house a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah, I think for sure. I think they're gonna be experimenting a lot. And right now, I wouldn't say this defense is solidified whatsoever.
No.
So I think it's important that they do experiment, because now's the time to do it.
Yeah,
really.
During training camp, exactly.
Training camp, beginning of the season. As you move on through the season, it's going to be more difficult to do that. But even on the power play, he might be playing the right side too on the power play. So just because of the offhand, right? And then you have a guy like, we mentioned TK potentially playing on his offhand, right? And they do the kind of that umbrella. So maybe it's something he has to get more comfortable with in general, because he's probably going to get power play time. All right, next topic, Cam York. So I just want to bring this up, and obviously the game happened, but looking at him at camp, I mean, he looked like a stud at camp. He had a couple goals in the scrimmage that I watched. His shot has definitely improved, which is one of the things I've talked about since he's been drafted that had to get improved, and he was ripping. He was absolutely ripping. Now, I'm not saying that this kid has hit his max potential or anything, but he looked incredibly confident, and this is a guy, with a new number, a little bit older. He's going to have a bunch of minutes coming in. To me, he looked really good. He even looked a little bit bigger, a little stronger. And that really excites me, because we're going to rely heavily on this guy. And I think they threw him into that test on Monday, expecting that. And I think they're going to want more out of him. And I think like he mentally is ready for it. He showed up to camp with kind of a different attitude this year, where he seems bolder as a player, like more willing to take a risk. And that was definitely noticeable.
Yeah, I think that's a key part, obviously, to York's game, right? I think last season, it's been mentioned that one of the reasons he got sent down was that he was actually playing too safe, and the coaching staff wanted him to take chances, try to make plays. And I think you're seeing a return to that, obviously, in this camp, but also even to end last season, right? You saw more of that, and I think a whole reason for having Sanheim on the right here is so York can effectively get top type minutes playing on the left hand side. And Tortorella did say, right, it's his duty to develop Cam on that left side because that is his natural position.
Hmm.
So it's definitely, I think, a good thing for York to get back to the left side. He's probably more comfortable in general. I mean, you're going to be more comfortable as a defenseman playing in a position that you have played in your entire career versus your offhand, both defensively and offensively. I think a big thing for York is the stretch pass game, right? Like,
Yep.
so if you look at, when you're playing on your offside, that limits you in terms of your cross ice type passes, things like that. So I think it's good for him to get back to the left. Obviously, I haven't been able to be at training camp to kind of see him in person, but from highlight videos, things like that, things that you sent me, he does look really good. That goal that he scored in the scrimmage against Hart was great. Just the way he kind of like fluttered across the blue line and then snipes it by him. Like that's what you would want to see on a power play from York, obviously. So it's encouraging to see that in camp. Still only one play. And I mean, he wasn't perfect last night, but I think this has the potential, at least with the ice time and the power play opportunity that, is up for grabs here. It has the potential to be a breakout season for York if he can kind of grab it by the horns, right?
Yeah, for sure. He's looking good. He's looking good. All right. Next topic we had. This is another kind of weird story that went under the radar, which I mean, nobody's really even talking about it now. Like Jamie even called me about it. Um, but nobody's really talking about it. And this is also kind of a weird thing that nobody had any idea about. But Rasmus Ristolainen during the off season had a stint with the Finnish military. Now, for those of you who are not aware, in Finland, as 18 to 29 year old male, you're required to go into the military. So he has time in the military in general. It most likely, we didn't experience this, but it most likely happened when he was with Buffalo, or even potentially a little bit prior, where he spent time in the military as required by the nation. I can tell you, I'm Israeli. That is something you go through in Israel. Finland's got a very small population, like Israel, and typically in those type of countries, you kind of use everybody as your reserves, so everyone is required for military duty. I would imagine it's not as enforced as it seems from the outside. But it definitely is almost a rite of passage and frowned upon not to go. To some degree, maybe you can get out of it, but unless you have a good reason, you can't. And this happens with Israeli soldiers as well. Even if you're working in an office job later, typically they will pull you back in at some point to go through training, through boot camp again, because they want you to be fresh and to remember what you've learned back in the day. And that seems to be what he experienced. I have to say, one, it's good that it's actually, military service. So you're actually doing, physical training to some degree. But I have to say, when you look at John Tortorella and the fact that I think his son is in the Marines, if I remember correctly, and he refers to his son as a leader of men, most likely John Tortorella loved this, was all for it, and probably gives him an appreciation for Ristolainen, because I could see Tortorella this hitting kind of like a hitting home for him. I know he believes in military service. So overall, I think it's interesting. I hope that it doesn't affect any of his off-season training. And so far, I would say it didn't look like it. But I thought it was an interesting story nonetheless.
Yeah, it's definitely something that you don't hear quite often, especially with somebody at Ristolainen's age. But as you were saying, I mean, it happens in the sense that people can get called back all the time. And I mean, it happened to him this summer. Obviously, missing 8 weeks of your typical training isn't ideal for any player. But as you're saying, right, it's the military. So there's some sort of physicality in terms of whatever training he was probably doing there. It's not going to be to the same extent in terms of what he would have maybe at the Flyers facilities or like professional facilities that he would be training at or being able to get on the ice, let's say. But
Yeah.
I mean, there's still some sort of physical nature to it. It's interesting from the sense that, I mean, Ristolainen obviously is a guy that has a type of nationalistic pride to go back and do that for his country and for Finland here. And with the Tortorella connection and his kind of involvement, just in terms of like the military, his son, and his attitude towards that, I think if anything, it probably builds a stronger relationship between Torts and Risto here.
I think so.
So it's probably a good thing for Ristolainen, just because I mean, there's another kind of level that him and the coach kind of have in common in this situation. But I am, interested to see Risto in game action, kind of see if, him losing that time does affect his game. He probably had the best defensive season of his career last year. So you want, as the Flyers, to see him follow that up, especially with, losing some pieces on the back end here. So the Flyers cannot afford Ristolainen to not really play like he did last season, right? They're going to need that same player again. So you just have to hope that losing those 8 weeks, doesn't affect him and his ability to kind of get back into the thick of things and return to that form that he showed last season.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think it will. But it is, it is interesting. Anytime you're taken off the ice to different kind of training, you don't know exactly what that'll manifest to. But he's a pro at this point,
Yep.
and I don't think for Ristolainen, from what I understand, it should have even potentially gone longer. So he got out earlier. So you can tell they kind of let him go even earlier to get back for training camp and get prepared for the hockey season. So I think he should be okay. Again, he's already kind of a physical specimen, so I don't think it's going to be too much of an issue for him when it comes to weightlifting and all that stuff, right? Like
He's a beast.
The strength training is not something he's lacking on. Where like Sanheim does need the strength training more than Ristolainen. Ristolainen's already very strong, which I think plays in his favor. The other thing I wanted to bring up from training camp, and this was interesting, is while these and you wouldn't have necessarily seen this directly, Vasili, but you probably heard of it. But at one point during, I think it was the second scrimmage on Saturday, they were playing, and the game was definitely a little bit messier to some degree. And like the first scrimmage was very intense, and the second scrimmage wasn't. And Tortorella like halted everything, and went down and like let the team have it. And then the intensity went up a notch. And obviously we were missing Cam Atkinson from a game. TK was out a couple games. I think he really wanted that intensity to stay up in the early trainings. And I think that's what it was all about, is like, you look at the way that that guys like Hathaway and Delorier played, they were extremely physical to a point where they even got into like a little scuttle with Risto and York. And there was a lot of pushing and shoving. And, it was clear they were smiling. They obviously don't hate each other. But it was interesting to see that Tortorella was kind of demanding that intensity. To be honest with you, man, I think he is 100% right, and I've been saying it on this podcast. We've been talking about it this really nonstop. Everybody who keeps saying that size is not as important, and that's not true. Size is just as important. It's just you have to have the speed today. Physicality is a humongous thing, and you saw when those veteran players turned up the physical intensity, the younger players definitely got shut down by it. And that's what separates a lot of the young guys from the older guys. And a guy like Gendron, when the game got physical, he got pushed off the puck a lot.
Yeah, they can't handle it, right?
Right, they can't handle that physicality. And I think Torts wants them to see that and how important it is to get bigger and stronger and harder on the puck. And we saw that in the scrimmage. We'll talk about that. But that really, we saw in the rookie game, right? That really matters. And I like that Tortorella keeps pushing that, and he does not want anybody to take their foot off the pedal. Even in training camp, it's hard enough to get people up for games that don't matter. And I like that he put an emphasis on that.
Yeah, well, all of the time you practice how you play, right? So Torts is obviously trying to establish that. He wants the team to practice hard. I just thought his media availability, kind of addressing that, was really funny. I think somebody asked him, as either Charlie O'Connor or Jordan Hall, like, was there any reason why you came down? He said, well, we just stunk, so I had to, basically, right? We didn't have that intensity. So it's just classic Torts in the sense of being honest, right? And I think his players probably would appreciate that, hey, he's calling them out. He doesn't think they look great, and they respond and look a lot better. Obviously, I was not there, Yariv, and you were in that case. Was that second group more of an older group and full of more veterans, or was it like a younger kind of group in terms of the scrimmage?
No, it was just, it was because they had everything pretty mixed up.
Okay.
in between, but you could just see like the game got like, it felt more like pickup hockey in the second game in the beginning.
Less structure. Yeah.
A lot less structure, a lot more like kind of, easygoing plays. And then after he kind of make that statement, it was just like the intensity just ratcheted up and
Yeah.
the violence went up,
Well, I mean, at least this is my interpretation of what these scrimmagers are, right? Like, you want to replicate in-game situations. It's tough enough to do that. But in order to do that, you need to have guys kind of ascribe to a certain level of intensity, as you were saying, right? So if that's not there, you're not actively going to replicate that game situation, which is what Tortorella is looking for. I mean, like you said, he's trying to do it so the younger guys get a sense of, okay, this is what it's like to be at the NHL level, essentially.
Yeah.
But also, too, I mean, you want to see that your veteran group is engaged. And that's good for the guys that are pushing for roster spots, right? There has to be competition. Everybody wants to actually, be giving their all out there. You don't want people taking shifts off because that can translate into bad habits. And you don't want that to begin in training camp. So I think it's a good thing for Tortorella to kind of come down and do that. If you don't like what you see from the team, it's better to call it out than let it fester and then have it show up in, even later in training camp as you get closer to the regular season. So I respect the decision by him to do that even so early. Like, it might seem like, geez, okay, you're hitting the panic button a bit, but I think it's better to address something versus leave it and let it kind of fester, right?
Yeah. And look, my fear is always risk of injury in these training camps, but if you can't handle the training against your own team, you're going to get injured.
How are you going to handle the games? Yeah, exactly.
And we need to create a culture here of intensity. It is important. And I bring up the Boston Bruins all the time. How do you guys think that they can roll in new players? Like, yeah, they lost some key pieces, but this happened to them in the past and they didn't miss a beat when, when Zdeno Chara left and they did not miss a beat. That is the culture that they built internally. And I was talking to Charlie about this at training camp. I'm like, because we were talking, because he was like, oh, I'm not so sure about Boston. I'm like, I am, I don't know. Like, I look at teams that can kind of cycle in new player, next man up. It's internal competition that creates that. And it's not just a talent thing.
The thing with the Bruins is like their defense hasn't changed. Their goaltenders haven't changed. They lost Bergeron and Krejci. That's obviously the big loss. I'm interested to see Pavel Zacha, though. Like, he had 57 points last season. You don't see really anybody mention that. And he wasn't really playing with, Marchand, Pasternak. So now you're going to put him as the 1C between those two guys. I don't know. I think he's probably going to do pretty well, but we'll see how it turns out for Boston.
Yeah. And again, it's about creating that culture of winning and hard hitting and competition and intensity, right? And bringing that to the ice every day. And it's a big reason why the Flyers signed a guy like Garrett Hathaway, is to create that. I can tell you, Hathaway, every single shift was intense. Every single one, even before and after Tortorella brought up anything. He was on you within seconds, and he had no problem being physical. Well, there's a reason we brought him in.
Torts, praised him in one of the availabilities that I watched. Exactly. I think a question got brought up about Garnet Hathaway, and essentially he was saying he is literally like the ultimate pro that you would want in this type of role for the young guys to see, right? Like, every day he's coming to the rink with that mindset. Okay, we're here to work. We're here to work hard. We're here to, put our time in and put the intensity in. And for your young players, you want as many of those types of guys around as possible, because they need to understand what it takes to be able to stick and make it at the NHL level. And Hathaway obviously has done that for years at this point. So I think it's good for the Flyers to bring guys like that in, right? Even if it is only on a fourth line, just the mentality that those types of players have, you want the rest of your team to be able to have similar mentalities to that.
Absolutely. And I've said this about Morgan Frost, and I think it is true. Like, I think if Morgan Frost wants Torts to buy in on him, go get into a fight. Like, I'm not even kidding. Like, people might think, oh, that's not his game. Okay. Well, that's what the NHL is. It's a bunch of men who will spear you and cross-check you and punch you in the face.
Well, you're fighting for every little inch on the ice, right?
Exactly. So I think if Morgan, like, literally, even if you lost the fight, you know what I mean? It doesn't matter. Be a fighter. Be a fighter internally. Yeah. This is a fighting man's sport. So if you're not playing that way, you will get lost in the shuffle. Like, it will happen. There's a reason Zach McEwen kept getting ice time. There's a reason the Flyers were able to trade him. He's not the most talented guy. He fights for every
But he's
inch
giving
on
his
the ice.
all out there. Yeah.
Every time. And he's fighting for every inch. He'll fight you. He'll check you. He'll stick you. He'll do whatever he has to do to separate you from the puck. Right. And that is it. That is it. That is hockey. The point is not to check people, it's to separate them from the puck. Right. Yeah. And any way you have to legally. Right. So I get it. I get it. Make that the default. Right. The default.
Well, you want that mentality, right? You want the team to be a fighting team. You want, and this is what Tortorella is trying to establish, right? Like, when the going gets tough, you want the team to be able to fight back and respond. And this is how you create that type of situation.
Yeah.
If you're not, trying to get this from your players now, what's going to happen when, the regular season comes around and they're in this tough scenario where they're down and need to rally back? It's going to be much harder if you haven't trained for that throughout the training camp and things like that, right?
Yeah, and if you remember how Claude Giroux played, every shift, super intense. Every shift was intense from Giroux. Every shift, he was diving for the puck. He was smacking people. You want that competitive
nature, man.
Without a doubt. Look, if you're a 1%er in the McDavid category, you can get away with skating circles around guys, sure. There's a reason I call them 1%ers. Is because most guys are not capable of that game. So that means everyone else has to be able to play highly intense all the time. In fact, if you look at Alexander Ovechkin, like, tell people Ovechkin is not intense. He'll throw people. You know what I mean? That's a guy who will just slam people in the walls. Think about even a guy like Jeremy Roenick. If you guys remember, he's checking people during the All-Star game.
Very intense, yeah.
Yeah, you want to be an intense hockey player. It is how you get your coach to buy in. It's how you rally your team behind you. It's how you become a tougher team to play against. And if you practice tough, you play tough. You are what you do repeatedly.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's where the consistency comes from. If you are practicing hard, you will play hard. Regardless if you're worn out, you'll get used to it.
And the thing is, too, right? Like, when you're practicing in this nature, you're building those small habits of the game and defensive habits that the coaching staff is looking for. If you're not constantly doing that, despite the fact that you know the system and you know what they want, when you need to think on the ice in a split second, because it's quick out there when you're on the ice, man. Like, those habits, if they're not in your repertoire already, it's hard for you to make that play on a dime and do what the coach wants. So you need to kind of instill it from now, and that's the point of training camp, right?
Yes. And if this team, who is lacking talent in certain areas, wants to compete against the better teams in the league, it's going to be like that. Yeah. It won't be with skill. It will be stinginess and toughness.
Working hard
every shift. I'm sorry. In my opinion, he's absolutely right. He's absolutely right. Because
based on the makeup of the roster, yeah.
Yes.
That's what they're going to have to do to really be a competitor if they want to be anyway.
And if you instill that with your entire roster, and then all of a sudden you do add the talent, and then they see that that's the culture, and Cutter Gauthier comes in here and he plays that way, and he's a monster, right? He's a big, thick kid. He's going to be strong as hell. And he sees that that's the attitude this team plays, strong and physical, and you better play strong and physical. We bring that game out of Cutter Gauthier even more at the pro level. I mean, you're talking about an elite talent with a physical touch. I talk about Tage Thompson's maybe my favorite elite player in the league. Like, he became much more physical and then hit the next level. Like, he's using his 6'6" frame. He's not Mario Lemieux. He's very talented, but if you're Mario Lemieux, you can get away without bashing people. But again, 1%er. So unless you're a 1%er, you're probably not getting away with that. All right. Speaking of getting away with it, and speaking of not playing intense enough, the Philadelphia Flyers finally had their first preseason game. And it's a game that they were definitely outmatched in on paper. I mean, you had a lot of the Devils starters were in that game. That's something that you should definitely keep in mind. The Flyers were outgunned in this game to begin with. Cam Atkinson, who was supposed to play, did not play in this game, right? So that was kind of it. He was last minute kind of switched out for Wade Allison. And the Flyers clearly put players that they just wanted to look at, right? I think there's kind of a misconception that these are the guys who are closer to making the team. I don't think that was what was happening. I think it was all just about situational, right? Like, they put York without Risto out there, right? with Sean Walker. They put guys out there who they wanted to see how they can handle those situations, right? They wanted to see how does Bobby Brink do on a top line situation, right? Which he didn't do that well, right? They kind of put out a team there that they knew was going to be outgunned, but they wanted them to play hard. I don't think they were expecting the type of loss they had, but the Flyers came out there and let's be honest, within the first 7 minutes, they lost that game, right? It was boom,
Yep.
boom, boom, goal after goal. They were down 4-0 before you know it. And that's pretty much the end of the game. And then, at 3-0, Nick Seeler drops the gloves. Again, Seals is always good for this. This is why the coaches love him, trying to change the nature of the game. I would say
Turns
he
the
did.
energy.
Yeah. I would say he did. But the Devils still scored right again after that. But, overall, I think, the Flyers really weren't ready for that beginning of the game. And you can say that they were worn out from his training camps, but I don't buy that in the beginning of the game. I only buy that for like the second half of the game. You should have plenty of energy in the first 5-10 minutes of that game. So they were just disorganized. They were intimidated. And a young defense, and I mentioned this in the preview video, that we're probably going to see this defense get manhandled. I looked at the young players. It was a very young defensive core with really just Walker and Nick Seeler being the guys in there to support them. And the Flyers really didn't show up. And, we'll go through specifics, but what are your overall thoughts before we get into like Coots and Atkinson and stuff like that?
Yeah, so I mean, one thing I just wanted to mention, I kind of want to just list out who was on the Devils lineup and the kind of
Sure.
looks and points to, maybe this is why they lose in such a huge fashion, right? So first off, you have your starter, right? Like Devils are playing Vitek Vanacek to start off. The Flyers have potentially their third stringer and Cal Petersen starting. So you have a mismatch there already right off the bat. They have Eric Holland, Timo Meier, Alexander Holtzen, Michael McLeod, Andre Palat, Jesper Bratt, Cal Foote, their number one defenseman, and Dougie Hamilton, their number one center, and Nico Hischier. So when you look at it that way, I mean, and you see that Devils lineup versus the Flyers lineup, where you have your number one center in Couturier, who hasn't played in 686 games, and Cam York, I guess, is your potential de facto number one defenseman here. I just think the Devils lineup is much more deep than the Flyers lineup, so it kind of could be expected that something like this is going to happen. Though to have the Flyers come out and let up 4 goals in 5 minutes and 50 seconds, I don't care who's on the ice. I mean, that's kind of a team not playing, like we said, right, with intensity and really being ready for the game. It just seems like they weren't ready to start off. And when you're playing a team like the Devils, who are very fast, very quick, and have a lot of talented players that in this game, you're going to get burnt, and that's essentially what occurs here. I mean, overall, like Cal Petersen, in my opinion, was shaky. He didn't get much help at all from his defense, so you got to factor that in too, right? Like a lot of the goals that go in here are due to turnovers. I mean, Cam York has a bad turnover behind his net that results, in one of the goals. Andre was a -3. He had a couple turnovers in the first period that ended up, in the back of the net. So it's not what you ultimately want to see from those young defensemen. But it could all just be a learning experience too, right? Like if you look at what they're doing, these are things that the coaching staff can now point out and say, hey, like we need to start the game off in a manner where we're, not giving the puck away in these situations. I'm sure it's something that they're going to review and go over in camp for sure. And I think ultimately probably for the Flyers, the best thing about this is Sean Couturier getting to play. And just looking like himself out there. Just general thoughts on your end, Yariv. What did you think?
Yeah, I mean, about Petersen, look, it's easy to bash him for his pretty mediocre performance, but I think, take it with a grain of salt for sure. I would say even a large grain of salt. And I think Vasili put it well. It's like, yeah, he didn't come up with any big saves. He wasn't there when the team collapsed, but you look at those goals. I mean, he was not getting much support in the beginning of the game. He was kind of getting worked in the defense, and the team, they really couldn't stop the Devils at all within that first 7-8 minutes. I mean, it was like watching an ECHL team play an NHL team at one point, unless Sean Couturier was on the ice, they look like a disaster. And I do want to spend time talking about Couturier specifically. We'll dig into him specifically, but it wasn't a good performance by most of the players. Frost included on that. overall, it was one of those. It's the reason they're practicing the way that they're practicing, because they didn't start off intense enough, right? They started off intimidated. Maybe the moment got to them. I don't know. They settled down a lot after the first 10 minutes.
Yeah.
Things definitely changed. They never looked like they were in a position to win the game or anything like that. But they did have some scoring chances as things went on. But I think this is what the coaches wanted the players to understand themselves. And we'll talk about it. I think a lot of those players they knew aren't even close to NHL ready, like Bonk and Barkey. But they wanted them to feel what it's like in an NHL game. And trust me, they felt it. They felt it, because you cannot play the way you play at the juniors level, at the ECHL level, at the AHL level in the NHL. You cannot show up with that type of preparation. You will lose the game within the first 10 minutes. And that's exactly what happened. They never stood a chance after that 10 minutes to even come really close in that game. They did have some opportunities to score, but they really didn't get close. As far as Coots goes, and let's dig into him a little bit, and we can go through the other guys too. But as far as Coots goes, I mean, look, he looked shaky in the very beginning, at least like trying to get his bearings right. But in my opinion, I think he looked like the best player in the game on both teams. And if you watch that game and you listen to the way the announcers were talking about him, they couldn't stop talking about him. He was still in the right position. Like, the guy's hockey IQ is so high,
off the charts.
Yeah, he doesn't just make the right play. He makes the best play that is possible. Sometimes you might not even see it coming, like 95% of the time. And even a guy who hasn't played for 2 years, one, I still believe he will be captain of this team. And I still believe that Tortorella might prove himself wrong by the end of this year. That Coots will get potentially even a C this year. I don't think he even knows Sean Couturier as well as we do yet. And seeing Coots out there, one, felt amazing. Two, it's the Coots that I know and love. And it's why I've been talking so high about him. He's a game-changing player. And you could see it. When he was on the ice, the team felt stable. And almost like clockwork, I would watch him leave the ice and then they would score in the beginning of the game. Like, he could kind of settle the game down, but everybody else really couldn't. But I did think that line, which started off with Brink and then eventually, which I called out in the pregame video, they moved Forrester up to the top line. That was clear cut the Flyers' top line. I think Frost disappeared in that game under physicality. And this is the knock on him. And, I'm high on Frost's offensive game, but it shows, like, when the team isn't there and physically isn't there, and he's not physically engaged in the game, he disappears. And I think that that's kind of a shame. But Sean Couturier is the exact opposite. He is the most consistent player in this organization. And I got to say, for not playing for 2 years and playing in a game where you're heavily outgunned in that game, I loved it. I love the way he played. And honestly, I think he could have even had a point in that game. If things bounced a little bit the opposite way. The Flyers did actually get some good chances. And even Matt Brown, who I did think looked good in that game once again, hit a breakaway, or had a breakaway where he hit the post right late in the game. So I think he kind of has some of that element. He's going to really surprise people in the AHL if he continues to do what he's doing. But Sean Couturier, like, bravo, my friend. Like, he's harsh on himself, but I was incredibly satisfied with the way he performed.
I mean, he's obviously not at the level that he himself wants. Like, he's going to progressively get better and look better as it goes along. Like we mentioned, right? It's his first game in 686 days. He hasn't played since December.
The game.
He finished the game. He even took some, pretty physical hits to start off. Like, he even initiated himself and threw a pretty decent hit. So it kind of shows that he's ready and was ready to get physical in this one. I thought, here's some interesting stuff. So if you look at his stat line, I mean, he's only a -1. And if you're looking at a team that loses 6-0 to only be on the ice for 1 goal against, I mean, that's, Sean Couturier in a nutshell there, right? Like, he's not usually making a lot of mistakes. Another thing to note, he played 18 minutes and 5 seconds, so quite a bit of ice time for him.
The most of any forward.
Yeah, so that's good, obviously, to see. He had 2 takeaways.
Sorry, second most.
Okay, yeah, no worries.
Farabee was number 1 with 18-22.
he had 2 takeaways in the game as well. The only other player who had 2 takeaways on the Flyers was Ole Lichell.
No,
And on
Brandon Fury also did.
Brandon Fury also did. Okay.
Sorry to correct you, but I'm looking at the stats here.
Yeah, I have it too. I just maybe where I'm looking doesn't have the correct ones, I guess. But
ESPN has him with 2 takeaways.
either way, whatever. Couturier's got 2 takeaways. I think the Devils, Timo Meier had the game high of 3. So Couturier is doing things that he typically does, right? Like his stick positioning is always, usually in the right place. He's usually well positioned in general. I thought, like I said before, he just looked like himself. Like I didn't see him lose a step or in any situation. Like his skating stride looked very similar to it did, when we saw him play in the past. So I think that was kind of what you're looking for, right? Like you want to see him look like himself, not look like a different type of player. And his IQ was there. Like I said, a lot of really good plays where he stick checked a lot of people and broke up, plays for the Devils, despite the fact they're losing 6-0. Another thing I saw from Coots too is there was one play in the third period where he kind of broke a play up in the neutral zone. He carries the puck into the O zone. He wraps it around, the boards there, and then it goes right to Tyson Forster, who finds Farabee for a good shot. So like just always kind of putting the pucks in good positions for his teammates as well. So it's encouraging to see for his first game, and I think he's bound to improve as it goes along, obviously. And then just some other people that stood out for me in the game in general on the Flyers perspective. Matt Brown, as you said, I mean, he had 2 really good scoring chances. He did not score, unfortunately. Tyson Forster looked okay. He probably had his best moments on the power play, and I mean, for him, that's usually where he's going to excel. Couturier had a nice spin around pass to him. He got a shot on net. He did not score there. Joel Farabee looked pretty good too. He had kind of like a partial breakaway, didn't score, made a nice move on Vanacek, but couldn't beat him. And he had some chances too. So, I mean, overall though, the forwards in general, I don't think there was much to stand out. Like you'd like to see Morgan Frost make his presence felt there. He kind of looked invisible.
I will say, I mean, especially for getting the most shifts on the team. I'm sorry to cut you off, but he had 22 shifts, one more than Coots.
He didn't Frost?
Yeah, Frost had 22 shifts.
Okay.
One more than Couturier. He was also 7 and 7, 50% on the faceoff, which is not bad. Coots was again 55.6% on the faceoffs. So
he's an asset in the dot.
Yeah, going from a team that can't win faceoffs this year, coming back in the first game and still winning majority of his faceoffs. Also impressive. But yeah,
you don't lose that skill.
Yeah, no. And hopefully he can spread that to the rest of the team. And I think Morgan Frost will improve again. I'm ripping him a little bit, but it's not like I expect him to struggle the entire time here. I think it was just a tough game for everybody involved in that game. And he didn't necessarily have the best line mates right in that game. He didn't come in, playing with, the level of talent that he's going to be playing in the NHL, but he needed to drive play more than he did. And then Coots also led everybody in special teams time, 220. Oh, no, I'm sorry. Bobby Brink actually had 242 of power play time. Couturier had 220 and then 234 on the penalty kill, only less than Joel Farabee, who, to be honest with you, Farabee also played well. I think he didn't play perfect. He didn't have an amazing game, but I thought Farabee and Coots were really the most consistent players on the offensive side in this game, and it shows in the numbers. And it showed in the opportunities. I think Forrester didn't show up until he was moved to that top line playing with Sean Couturier. We might see that at some point this year too. We talked about it a lot in the preseason. I think Tuamalo actually played all right at times. He definitely looks more physical than he was last year, but a lot of these guys kind of looked invisible. Maybe Brandon Fury had some good moves with the puck here and there.
Good moments. Had some PK time as well.
Yeah.
I mean, the defense, to be honest, there wasn't really much other than Sealer. Like Sealer looked like his normal self. I think the defense was pretty abysmal to start, and then progressively they got better. I mean, you'd like to see more from York. You'd like to see more from Andre. They did rebound a bit after their shaky start, But I mean, especially for a guy like Andre, I think if he's going to make the team, you're going to need to see more consistency, and that's in the defensive zone, but also just like being able to make plays offensively, because that's what they're looking for from him, right? They want to see him kind of drive the puck up the ice in transition. We did not see that a lot. But once again, it's only the first preseason game, and you have to take into account, and we'll get into this now, that the team did have a bag skate essentially to start their training camp, which was the skating test that Tortorella always does at camp, and 3 straight days of scrimmaging, and more than 1 scrimmage a day for some of the teams here. So I mean, when you have that type of schedule going into a game, and plus a morning skate the day of the game as well, I believe. I mean, of course, you're going to have some guys with tired legs, especially guys that are younger, like some of the guys like on the OHL side of things, like a Barkey, like a Bonk, like they're not used to that type of practice regimen in the OHL whatsoever, right? So like you can see it in those types of players' games for sure. But I think for at least some of the guys, like people are wondering, like why did the Flyers go with such a young lineup in a situation? I think it's typically common, right? Like in road games, in the preseason, that you're not going to go with your best lineup. You kind of want to have a closer to regular season lineup at home for your fans, which is what the Devils have in the situation, right? Because they have a split squad game going on last night too, and the other squad that played Montreal, other than Jack Hughes, is mainly like AHL type guys, right? So they kind of put more of their NHL starters in this lineup. But yeah, so like if you look at it, I think Barkey and Bonk specifically, they get these games to kind of reward them for their play in the rookie camp. And then overall too, it's something to look at and say, well, hey, there's a lot for us to look at in camp now and review and build on, just in terms of, okay, what can we do with our systems to make sure we don't play this way in the future? Is there anything we can adjust? So it'll be interesting to see like how they review this and kind of adjust some of the mistakes, especially from the first period.
Absolutely. And we'll get into this, but I think a lot of it is to eliminate players too. Like I think there was an assumption, oh, these guys are being picked because they're like have the most interest. I think they did pique the interest, but I think, it's kind of subconsciously like, I think they knew that they were going to fail to some degree in this situation. They knew they were putting them in a really tough situation. And I think they wanted them to feel what it would like to have those tough games in the NHL where you're exhausted and you just traveled into town and maybe you thought it was wise to go out the night before or whatever, and to show how much that can burn you in the NHL. And how much preparation really, really, really matters. And that they're not ready, and they want them to see that. So they work harder to get to that point. I think it's really, really important that the players understand that going into this, that it is always going to be difficult at the NHL level, and that there is such a humongous jump between the AHL and the NHL. And especially if you're coming from juniors or the NCAA. The one thing I do want to say that I don't think people are giving him enough credit for, but Felix Sandstrom played very well in this game. Yeah, he did. And he gave up 1 goal. He had a 900 save percentage. He gave up 1 goal on 10 shots, and that 1 goal was a breakaway. And how you can't blame a goalie for giving up a breakaway, a clear-cut breakaway goal. It was in no way a bad goal. He got deked out by a good player who,
Michael McLeod, yeah.
Right, exactly. There's a good chance that he was going to score on that.
NHL player. So,
and outside of that, and I want to bring that up. You know what? Well, I'll wait because we're going to be talking about the bubble team stuff. So we'll talk about that. But I think people, whatever your thoughts were on last season, on what you think these players are, again, he's 26 years old. We've brought it up so many times. NHL players, NHL goaltenders are not ready typically till they're like 26, 27. Carter Hart is an anomaly. So anybody who's sitting and go, I don't see it. Okay, well, he's still way ahead of schedule. And the fact that he's as good as he is and has been as good as he is at such a young age is an anomaly. It's a 1%er thing.
Majority of NHL goalies come in around like 25, something like that. Like you're saying, 25 to 27.
Touch the league.
Yeah, exactly. Right. So like he's almost coming into his own as a goalie in this type of league. Like I'll always give this example. Craig Anderson, he was a really good starter for a lot of years. He was not a starting goalie until like age 29.
Tim
Thomas as well, right? So like the goaltending position is a lot different. There's a lot more. Yeah, Hudobin as well. There's a lot more mental to it there's so much of a mental game and just being confident in yourself as a goalie. Like if you're out there and you don't have confidence and you're lacking that as a goaltender in the NHL, you're gonna get burned real quick, real fast. And not to
And
say that, Cal Petersen is lacking confidence or anything,
he might
but
be, but
he might be if you just, that's what I mean, right? I kind of wanted to bring it up due to that. Like if you look at his past seasons in LA, he ended up going from, the here to Jonathan Quick to I'm an AHL goaltender and I'm putting up like sub 900 save percentage at the AHL level. That's not to say that in this game it was his fault because I think he got left out to dry just based on some of the turnovers.
yeah.
Obviously, you want to see him make a save and kind of keep the team in it, but like it's hard in those circumstances. But I think for Petersen, you can see a goalie that probably is lacking confidence, and then to have that start, it's not going to help. You know what
Yeah,
I mean? And
absolutely.
then you
I
go
think they're
to
going to take it easy on him. Personally, the
yeah,
coaching staff.
exactly. And then you go to Sandstrom and you get kind of the opposite. I think you see a guy that, hey, like I played in the NHL last season. I had
He
my
had
ups, I
these
had my
moments.
yeah, I had my ups, I had my downs, but I know that I can be an NHL goaltender. And I think you saw him come into the game, even though the team's already down 5-0, he looked confident. He was at the top of his crease, challenging shooters. He made some good saves. Like they scored the
Absolutely.
goal on him, but you don't see him kind of crumble after that, and he stays solid. So
Yeah.
the goaltending, I think, might be one of the most interesting camp battles that the Flyers probably have. So
And
it'll be
and I
interesting to monitor
and
that.
I want to add something here that, I didn't actually realize until last year, but even Igor Shesterkin, who is, you know, named, outside of Vasilevsky, like the best goaltender in the league, right? He is 27, turning
Yeah,
28 in December. So he came into the NHL at
25.
24, 25,
Yeah, exactly.
where Carter Hart is 25 right now.
Same with Ilya Sorokin. Like, you
Like,
know,
I don't think people really pay attention to goaltenders as far like this city is a goaltender hell because we do not respect the position. We even treat Steve Mason as like a garbage goaltender. Well, guess what? Until Carter Hart showed up here, he was the best goaltender we had, and he wasn't amazing, but he was a true number one goalie. And you look at Shesterkin, he's going to be 28 this year. He's not a kid. You know what I mean? He didn't have like a lights out season last year as far as statistics like he did the previous year. He had a really good season, a 2.48 goals against and a 0.961 or 16 save percentage. It's good, but that goes back. That's like the same numbers he had his first and second year in the league. He only had one outlier season. This guy's 28 years old or going to be 28 years old. So, like, for all these people jumping on, Carter Hart, and if Ersan has a bad game at 23, it's like, guys, they're not wingers in the NHL. Winger is the easiest one to come into. Then you have your centerman, then you have your defense, and then you have your goaltenders, right? So it's like the goaltenders take a while. It is what it
always,
is.
yeah. And the position, I mean, from somebody who's played his whole life, it's just a voodoo type position. Like a goalie could have a really good game one game, and you could go into the next game and get seven scored on him somehow, right? Like a lot of it is mental. It's all between the ears sometimes. You
Yeah.
have one weird thing go wrong, and then it can just spiral,
And
right? So that's
and
why the mental fortitude is so important for that
yeah.
position.
And even prior to Shesterkin, it was Henrik Lundqvist, the king, right? He came in, I think, 24, 25 years
It was
old.
literally, yeah, 25.
25 years old. Took him a while to get started. So everybody who's jumping on these guys who are 25 years old and going, they stink. It's like, to be honest with you, I just ignored you. Because I just assume that you don't know what you're talking about when it comes to goalie development, because I don't operate that way. I've seen enough data and enough goaltenders at this point to understand how long it takes to develop a goalie. So I don't consider most goalies a throwaway. I just don't see it that way. So let's get in. Speaking of goaltenders, let's get into the next topic because we're going to go into bubble players here at the end. And we're kind of trending into that direction right now. So some news came out today. Speaking of training camps, speaking of goalies, Bjarnason got his contract all of a sudden. Not that out of the blue, actually, considering he was here at camp. He got a long look. He got the rookie game. He was playing all through training camp. He gets a 3-year deal at $950,000 per season. Again, he's going to go play in the WHL. He's not going to be playing against men probably for a couple of years. He won't be over with the Phantoms. So I would expect that he'll be over with the Phantoms probably around 20, 21 years old, and he'll probably spend a few years in the minors, barring some kind of large jump.
Yeah.
But I got to say, man, I'm not surprised considering the way Brent Flair talked about him and the fact the Flyers moved up in the draft to get him. I think they're very high on him.
Yeah.
And I love that about Briere, that he is aggressive. And when he knows what he wants, he goes out and signs him. He went out and signed Kolosov. He's signing the guys that they truly believe in. And for those people who are responding when Kolosov gets signed and when Bjarnason gets signed and be like, oh, this is the end of Hart. Nope. Has nothing to do with it. Absolutely nothing to do with it.
Well, I mean,
just like when people were freaking out and said Petersen was here to replace Hart, which I could not believe that people around the NHL were saying that. My mind was blown.
Yeah, that's a funny one for sure. I mean, Bjarnason is 18 years old. Bjarnason's 18 years old. As we just said, right? Most goalies don't come into the league around 24, 25. There's a long road ahead of him to develop here.
Yes.
A very long road. He's going to have probably at 18, 2 more years maybe in the WHL here, and then potentially make it to the Phantoms. And as you said, maybe 1-2 years there, and then by that point he's about 24, and then maybe he'll get his first NHL opportunity, right? So That's typically when a goaltender's on track. Bjarnason's an interesting one, and I am kind of glad that they gave him a contract at this point, right? It shows their faith in him and the fact that they're willing to, develop him down the line. Obviously, if you're going to trade up to select him, that was their intention all along. He was the number 1 rated goalie by Central Scouting in this past draft. So I think the Flyers got a steal by trading up to select him there. And for Brandon, he played really well. He was one of the top goalies in the WHL. And then I would imagine that he's going to be one of the top goalies again this upcoming season. So it'll be interesting to kind of monitor him, his development, and see maybe if he can get a goalie of the year type nomination for the WHL this year.
Yeah, and I think that's what they're going to be looking for. They're going to be looking for what he does against junior competition. Hopefully he's in the World Junior Championship. And
for Canada.
Again, Carter Hart was ahead of him at the same age, but you never know. Again, he plays similar to Carter Hart. They're hoping, they have a bunch of young goaltenders that they're hoping turns out to be stars. And if they do, right, and Kolosov has been excellent and Erson's been excellent, and you look at these guys, it's like, hopefully we are in a position where we can trade Carter Hart. Like,
you're dealing from a position of strength in that case.
Hopefully we have 3 young stud goaltenders. Then at that point, you're like, okay, we can move Carter Hart for a number 1 defenseman maybe, or whatever, or a top pick or something, right? You really want to be in a position of strength with this. And I've never, ever, in all of the years that I've been watching the Flyers, seen this much talent in the goaltender position.
Yeah, this is the best their goalie prospect pool has looked in a long while here. And you know what? It's a position where if you can keep adding like they have been and you're hitting on some of these guys, you can make it lucrative for yourself because there's only so many goalies that you can keep on the roster, and every team always needs a goalie. So you can kind of make a deal and add to other areas where you might be lacking. So I like the management and the asset management that, Briere and the staff are kind of putting into place here, just stocking up on the goaltenders. Me as a goalie guy, I'm never going to say don't pick a goalie. So
right. And they're stocked up right now, and that allows them next draft to potentially ignore the goaltender position, right? I mean, I could see them take another goaltender next year just to continue adding to the crop, but I mean, they're pretty good. I've never seen this before. I've never seen the Flyers with 4 NHL goaltenders, and you know what I mean? And a bunch of young guys behind them, and even Nolan Myers, who played really well in the AHL for a young guy. It's a good position to be in. I have zero complaints about this. And speaking of his contract, in the same exact day, this is kind of what I was referencing earlier. There were actually 5 cuts today, right before we actually started recording. The Flyers cut 5 players. Jonathan Fouchon, who was a free agent, didn't expect him to make the team. Sam Sedley also, he was also sent back. Oliver Bonk, which we expect, right? And again, this is what I was talking about that game. It was to give them a test and then eliminate them, which is what I was assuming they were doing. Denver Barkey also was sent back. A guy, again, looks like a little teenager. He will take a while, but take that confidence in what you showed the NHL and the fact they gave you that game and take it back. And a lot of times these kids do, because the level of competition is much lower. and they will take that confidence with them. And then Carter Sutherland, also a draft pick from this past draft, was also sent back. So the Flyers are already doing work on kind of cutting down their roster. And we'll get into bubble stuff after this. What do you think?
Yeah, well, that's not surprising. I mean, on a day off, usually that's when a team's going to make their cuts. And I think to no surprise, as I was saying, it's a bunch of junior level guys and their camp invites. So it makes a lot of sense that they give some of the junior guys in Bonk and Barkey a little taste of what the NHL potentially could be like. Also as a reward, I think, for them just working hard, looking good in rookie camp, and then it kind of puts into their mind that, hey, like, this is what I need to work on, for my own game to try to adjust it to this level. So it's good to get those kids an opportunity. And before we actually move on to like the bubble players, Yariv, what was your thoughts on Cam Atkinson and just like his announcement of
we didn't talk about that.
Yeah, of not being in the lineup. I mean, everybody was really excited to see him get into game action. Obviously he's was cleared for health, was practicing in the scrimmages and looked decent, but what's your thoughts on him, not getting to suit up here? Do you think it's just something where the team's being precautious, as they said, or should we be reading into it a little more here?
My gut tells me it is precautionary. But with what has happened in the past, I would not blame anybody if they assumed the worst right now. I don't think anybody kind of expected him to be pulled last second, but you look at the situation, you look at how tough the Flyers have been playing, how worn out a lot of these guys were. If he felt any uncomfortability in any direction, maybe it had nothing to do with the surgery. We really don't know. And shout out to Jordan Hall, who did get us an update during the game where he did ask the Flyers, right? They said it was precautionary. They said he was a little bruised up. I think it's possible, right? He looked really good at camp. So I didn't see anything from him at camp that told me that he was falling behind or avoiding contact or anything like that. So, I'm going to stay optimistic for now, but it's definitely something we have to take a look at, right? Like, we have to consider it because he was supposed to be in his first game ever. I don't know if he was even, I wasn't expecting both of them to play at the same time, but when I saw it, I was like, okay, it makes sense. They want to get him in as soon as possible, but maybe they
get it over with.
Yeah, but maybe they also wanted to get him in a different situation where, he was playing with a veteran, where maybe they have more confidence in Couturier and less confidence in Atkinson, or they just wanted to mix it up. And like even Bjarnason wasn't sent back, right? So maybe Bjarnason is a goaltender that's going to play next game. And again, I believe these early games are to test and eliminate. And maybe, they wanted Couturier in one game and they're ultimately like, you know what, let's just give Atkinson a couple more days here and we'll play him next game. But if he doesn't play next game, it is a little concerning to me.
Yeah, I agree, because I think him and even Couturier kind of mentioned, right, like in their media availabilities on the first opening day of camp, that the big test for them is going to be, okay, well, you're taking contact against your teammates, but they're your teammates, right? You want to be able to do it in a real game situation and take that first big hit and kind of relieve that, mental side of it that is kind of going through their minds, right? Because these guys haven't played in the game in over a year. They haven't taken, opposing teams' hits and been in scrums and battles with them. So you want, as a player, just to ease yourself and know, hey, like, I'm back to normal. I can handle the rigors of this, to kind of go through that. So I think that's, at least for me, why, like, when I first heard that Couturier and Atkinson were going to play, that I thought, okay, this is a good thing, because you get it out of the way early for them, and then they're set and they're kind of ready to go. Jordan Hall, I think, got the update from Daniel Briere, and essentially Briere said that he was a little sore. The Flyers didn't want to take the chance. It's lower body, which is something to note. They actually mentioned that, which a lot of the times they do not. And there's nothing related to his neck injury last year. I tweeted out this, and I think a lot of Flyers fans, at least in the comments, kind of showed the same sentiments that, if it is precautionary, that's fine. And if it is just indeed soreness, okay, like, there's nothing wrong with that. But if you look at the medical track record the past few seasons, there's a reason that, people could maybe take it with a grain of salt. I think now we're just gonna have to wait and see, right? Unfortunately, we'll see in the next couple of days what it looks like. We'll get some more clarity. But if for some reason he does not play tomorrow, for me, that'll be concerning, because you wonder, okay, it went to 2 days, couple days off, and now it's like, almost 4 to 5 till the next game. So you wonder if it's a little more, serious than just something that we were initially expecting. But for Atkinson, man, you got to feel for the guy. You just want to see him probably get back into game action, especially if they're missing all this time and working his way back after all this. Like, if he was to actually get hurt again and it is somehow serious, like, that's just worst case scenario for him, I would imagine.
Yeah. I think the fact that they mentioned it was lower body, they wanted everybody to know that it's not necessarily,
a big deal.
a big deal, but they're incentivized to do that, not to panic people. We also don't really know. That's why I don't blame anybody for assuming the worst here. But for your mental health, I wouldn't. I would just wait and see,
Yeah.
Let's see what they say. Again, if he doesn't play next game again, I do think it's a little bit questionable.
Then the skepticism, I think, can come out a little bit more.
But we'll see. As this airs, that day the game roster will come out, and I do expect him on there. And if not, we don't know. We don't know. We don't want to see, because we saw this before, right? Atkinson's healthy, ready to go, and then all of a sudden he's not.
He was scrimmaging, taking a lot of hits last season against Ristolainen, I believe, in one of the scrimmages, and he looks like he was going really hard, and then next thing you know, he's out for the season. So hockey's a crazy sport, right? Like, sometimes a guy can be 100% healthy and one little thing that you tweak and, something happens. But we just hope for Atkinson's sake and just for him and his mental health in general. Like, how tough can it be to be a hockey player who loves to play the game of hockey and you cannot play, right? So
it's possible it's a separate injury too. Like, it is possible.
Yeah.
And it would be unfortunate luck, but it is possible.
Well, the Flyers mentioned that it is separate and isn't related to his prior injury. Mm-hmm. So I'd imagine, they're not, pulling the wool over our eyes there. One other injury related little bit of news before we kind of get into our bubble picks here is Travis Konechny was, day to day as well. They said, nothing serious. They wanted to keep him out, on the Sunday scrimmaging and for the Monday game. And then now he has a day off as well on the Tuesday. So we'll see if Konechny maybe gets into a game here on Wednesday. But
I would suspect more that Konechny, that one's more of I get why they would just hold him out.
Exactly.
There's no real reason to play a lot of the veterans early on outside of just getting them a little bit of ice time. Again, the early half of preseason, and they play a lot of preseason games. Every year.
6 of them.
Yeah. So I do expect that he might be held out anyway, from the early preseason games as it is. Yeah. Because again, they want to eliminate the other guys that they're looking at, right? Like,
the younger players.
Yeah. Lazinski didn't play, a lot of the players that you kind of expect to see that they need to kind of still figure out, they need to play first. So I think there's a chance that he might not play again. But I wouldn't jump to anything bad with TK. The Atkinson one is more the one that concerns me.
Yeah, agreed. And I think for TK, if you see him just skating, like morning skate, stuff like that, that's obviously a really good sign.
Yeah. All right, let's get into our last and final topic. And this is the bubble team thing. And what I want to preface with this, and I see a lot of talk about players making the team and all that. And this is the way I view it. Okay. I can't tell you exactly what the Flyers are thinking, but I do notice this kind of tendency to devalue players and get the ones that you want in or the ones that, had a better camp or any of that. But there is an asset management to all of this. You waive players, you risk losing them. And this is a long season. They picked a bunch of players, and not all of these players are capable of playing in the NHL. So even if he had an early good camp, that doesn't mean that they can handle an entire NHL season. And I don't think the Flyers are necessarily looking to lose players. An example of that is Igor Zamula, right? This is a guy that we know Tortorella likes. We know he can play well at the AHL level. And do they really want to pass him through waivers, right? So I look at a guy like that in comparison to Emil Andre, who has no risk, right? Who might be, might look really good, but you also have the opportunity to play Andre 22, 24 minutes a night rather than 14, 15 minutes a night in the NHL. You look at that opportunity, you're like, okay, well, Zamula's kind of done his time. We at least have to give him a serious look here at the NHL level. So a lot of people who are kind of jumping to Andre making the team and all that, I don't know. I'm still pretty skeptical because I'm like, this is also an asset management game. And there's a lot of guys that I think will get an opportunity based on their contract. And that's why even I said that about Sandstrom. It's like, do you really want to lose this guy potentially for nothing? You invested all this time into him. You don't know if he's worse than Petersen. right? Petersen's not getting taken by anybody with $5 million contract. So yeah, like maybe you go with Sandstrom and you allow Ersan to be the starter where he's going to play more games than competing with Carter Hart, even if he is the better goalie. It's like, but this whole process is about development, right? If you're really talking about development, you want to hold on to your players and develop them throughout this season. If you're already fighting for a playoff spot, I would say, yeah, we're in a different situation. You want to go with your best lineup and kind of go in through it. And if you haven't made the cut yet, we got other guys who can step up. And maybe that they do have that thought. But we saw it last year. Tyson Forrester came in, had 7 points in 8 games. He still got sent back down. So I want to make that clear to people that like just because some guy outplayed a veteran doesn't mean the season starts that way. The season's opening night roster is very rarely the closing night roster, right? The roster evolves as the season goes on. Do I think Andre will play a significant role in the NHL at some point or a significant amount of games? Yes. But do I think necessarily he's going to be starting in the NHL? My thought right now is no. Even if he's looked better than Zamula, even though I argue that maybe he didn't, because Zamula has had flashes already, and it's time for him. And I would hate to lose Zamula to a waiver pickup and allow a team to get him for free and use them as their number 7 or their number 6, as we have been developing him for years, and then we don't even really give him a shot in the NHL. So that's kind of my thought with all this. What do you think about what I just said?
Yeah, I agree. I think like there's just a method to all of the madness in terms of, okay, if you're a team and you have so many guys on the bubble of making it, if there's guys that, are waiver exempt versus not, depending on what the skill gap is, right? Like it might make more sense for you to keep the guys that are not waiver exempt in the NHL so you don't actually lose them. And I mean, if you do lose a guy like Zamula, I think that would be a shame because I mean, that could be a potential trade chip in the future. Or I mean, he could prove to be a really solid bottom pair option for you and you didn't even know it because you never gave him really the extended opportunity because last season, I mean, he had a handful of games, but they didn't give him any extended real look for more than like a 15-20 game period at a time. And in my opinion, for any player, I think a 20 game threshold is what you need to really kind of see what they're about. Like sometimes it takes a while for guys to get comfortable and like, play to their potential and play to their actual games and to their strengths, especially too if it's like a new system, things like that. In this situation, that's not the case. Zamula will be familiar. Kind of interested to see how he integrates into things here, especially with more competition. Ultimately, competition can be a good thing, right? For all players, it makes people push each other. You can get the best out of guys because they want to ensure that they can, have a spot on the team. Personally, for me, these are the guys that are on the bubble. I'm just gonna list them out, but
yeah, go for it.
Forrester, Brink, Desnoyers, I would say, Andre, Zamula, Victor Mete. So definitely. That's a good mix. Sandstrom, Cal Petersen as well, and Ersan probably on the goaltending side of things. All three of them are kind of competing there for that backup job. Personally, I mean, we know how much Andre is loved by the management. Even Tortorella praised him in some of his media availabilities to start camp here. I think after yesterday's games, maybe some of those maybe some of that enthusiasm about him is kind of tempered a bit. I think the real interesting thing will be how does Andre bounce back, after having not the greatest game yesterday, when, he was called, dominant by the GM and, the assistant GM expects him to make the team and things like that. So I think that'll be something to watch. If he bounces back and plays really strong the remainder of the, preseason and training camp, I think that could actually do wonders for him to even solidify a spot because they look at him and say, okay, well, look at this kid. We throw him in there. He has a terrible start to his first ever preseason NHL game. Then he bounces back and looks like himself. It looks like himself the remainder of the way. So I'll be looking for that. And I think if Andre does that, he'll probably secure himself a spot somewhere here. I really want to see them give Zamula a look, though, like at the NHL level. So that'll be the tough thing to juggle.
Torts likes him.
Yeah, so I'm interested to see where that all goes. It'll be something to monitor as we kind of go along here. I think Forster is going to make the team, to be honest, unless he really underwhelms here. He obviously hasn't stood out so much, at least in this first preseason game. But as we said, take it with a grain of salt. It's one game. He did score in the scrimmages, I believe, a couple goals. So I mean, he's showing at least on that level, some of the skill that kind of got him that call up last season. And we'll see where it goes from here. But I think Forster will likely make the team. I think Brink will probably be on the inside or on the outside looking in, as will Desnoyers, unless there happens to be some sort of injuries here. And then the goaltending, I think, is probably the most interesting battle, just for the backup. We know Hart is the starter. That was announced. But, I mean, you have three guys that could be backups, right? Like, Cal Petersen has had a lot of time in the NHL. Like, he can be an NHL backup. He hasn't played like an NHL backup the last couple seasons here, but that doesn't mean that he's not going to return to form at some point. And I really want to see how he looks with a better defense in front of him versus like the last game, like a more veteran defense. Like, let's see before we really make our judgments on Petersen. Let's see like what he looks like with, kind of Sanheim in there, Stahl in there, Sealer in there, like a more NHL ready defense. And if it's still the same at that point, then I think you look at it and say, well, obviously the confidence is missing from his game. I mean, he played in the AHL last season, put up sub 900 numbers. So if you see him with a more NHL ready lineup look the same, then I think it's probably him who might go to the AHL. And I mean, in that situation, the Flyers, they won't have any trouble getting him through waivers with that contract whatsoever. So he'll be an option for them to potentially call back up. Sandstrom and Erson's the battle that's really interesting to me. I mean, obviously Sandstrom's probably the lesser of the two in terms of overall talent and potential. But I mean, he showed last season he had some really solid games, and in a lot of his games last season, he played really well, and the team just did not give him any goal support whatsoever. Where like if they would have just scored, they might have had a good chance to win some of those games that he started. Yeah. I thought he played really good in the preseason game.
His losses came when the Flyers had all those injuries, if I recall.
Yeah, exactly. He was in a tough spot in a lot of situations last season. So I think, if you look at the record and you're judging off of that, I don't think that should be it, right? You kind of have to look back to those games and how he actually played, and he kept them in it. And it's just the fact that their lineup was so inferior to their opponents that they would end up losing, right? So it's interesting. Like, I think Sandstrom could be a really good backup in the league. I don't think he has starter potential at this point. I mean, it's possible for him to develop into that as time goes along. He's only 26 years old, and as we know, goalies, they're constantly evolving and getting better. So I wouldn't put it out of the realm of possibility because he's played really well and was a starter in Sweden in the SHL and played well in that league in the past. But yeah, Urson for me has more of the talent. We know that he has more starter potential, but just, do you want your 23-year-old goaltender who still is developing to sit on the bench for almost half the season? And I think that's where the Flyers are going to really have some tough decisions with their goaltenders, right? Because I think Tortorella really likes Urson, and that's been shown just from what he said about him in the past. But do you want him to sit on the bench when he could actually just be starting for you in the AHL, getting valuable minutes, getting that starter's workload to prepare him for potentially being a starter in the future? Yeah. So I think, if Urson clearly outplays everybody and he just lights out, like, I think you just have to give it to him based on merit. Sure. But if it's close between him and Sandstrom and they look similar in terms of their play and just like how everything is going, I think Sandstrom might have the edge here for the backup position, possibly.
Yeah. I think asset management is a big part of this, and like even somebody like Tanner Lazinski and Wade Allison, like, you should be hesitant to waive these guys.
Yeah, forgot to mention them as well.
Yeah, no, you might lose them for nothing in the beginning of the year. And look, there's going to be injuries, there's going to be issues. And we saw with a guy like Nicolas Aube-Kubel, who was waived probably mistakenly. We lost him, and then we probably could have used him at times during the season. And that was Chuck Fletcher. That wasn't Danny Briere. And I don't know. My attitude would be, in the very beginning of the season, I want to hold on to the players that I thought were going to be a part of this roster, right? So again, it's just the beginning of the season. As things go on, things could change, but you also have to take advantage of the beginning of the season with waivers, because a lot of teams have their teams locked up. So they're not necessarily going to jump to grab players from other teams, right? Unless they're high on them specifically. So it is the time to waive guys. It is the time to waive Tanner Lazinski, or if you waive him later in the season, you have a higher risk of losing him if he's playing in the NHL at times. So I know Torts isn't high on him, but Tanner had injuries last year too. So I could see a case here where the Flyers, again, go with players that aren't necessarily the best players, but are about asset management and will give them the opportunity to make the team during the regular season. And if it doesn't work out in the first 5-10 games, then they think about waiving guys, right? I could see a lot of that. Like, I don't think Brink is going to be on this team, like you said. I don't think Denoyer, either one of them has showed enough to make the NHL so far. I think a lot of these guys like Yinning is a very interesting player, but again, waiver exempt. He's a call-up guy. Like, a lot of these guys are going to be like top call-up options. And if you can waive them and move them up and down freely, you're going to want to do that. Now, I think Tyson Forrester is the only guy that I see where he hasn't looked bad at any time. He looked excellent in the NHL last year. We know Tortorella loves him. We're lacking scoring punch, right, as a team. He plays a role where like Allison cannot be that scoring guy, right? But there's still this whole thing here. So my thing is a lot of these young guys, they're going down to the AHL, whether they look good or not. And it's going to be a older lineup, which they won't be very old. They're still going to be much younger than last year. And I think a lot of coaches look at that too, where they might not want a 21-year-old on the roster to begin the year, right? They might want them to be in the AHL to build that confidence. And even a guy like Petersen, right? If he doesn't have the confidence right now, that doesn't mean he won't gain it in the AHL. And then maybe, Sandstrom struggles and they drop Sandstrom and call up Petersen, or they drop Sandstrom and they call up Ersan, right? It does not have to, none of these are permanent moves. So I would just be very cautious to get rid of players for nothing, unless I truly believe they will go through waivers, which again, we've seen that before. There are players that I thought would get picked up that didn't, but then there are players that I thought would get picked up and they did. Right. So you have to be careful because you're not really in a position to lose players right now. Having said that, we are in a rebuilding year. If we identify a player as not part of the future, like if Tortorella is like, I'm never going to really use Lazinski, right? If he decides that and he's like, guys, we tried, right? Like Hayden Hodgson.
Give him an opportunity somewhere else.
He gave him an opportunity. He's like, I just don't see it. And then you're like, okay, well, let's give him an opportunity somewhere else. That's why waivers exist. Right. And a team might take a chance on Lazinski or whatever and give him an opportunity. It's better. And then we get rid of that, then we free up a contract spot. Right. Because if your guy's not playing well enough to play in the NHL, you're not getting much for him anyway. If you are getting him in a trade, maybe you'll get a 7th round pick. Right. Maybe. Right. Or future considerations, which is essentially nothing. Right. So at a certain point, it's like, okay, it depends how training camp continues to go. And we'll revisit this conversation, obviously. At the end of training camp and, at the end of preseason, and we'll have a good idea. And every single game, I would expect more players to be eliminated from the competition or from the consideration. Right. Right now, I haven't really made any decisions, but I do think the Flyers early on will try to keep as many of the older players with the team to see if they really are getting rid of them or not. But it's barring preseason. Like you said, if Emil Andre comes back and starts lighting it up and you're like, okay, yeah, he is younger, but he's the best defenseman.
And he bounced back from a struggle. Like they're going to see that and say, hey, this is a type of guy we want to play.
They're not going to ignore that. But if it's about even and him and Sean Walker are having similar performances, or him and Nick Seeler are having similar performances, or him and Zamula, if he could clearly outplay Zamula, you go, okay, well, we tried with Zamula. We waited on you. You didn't do enough. You got beat out by a younger guy. You go. But if it's kind of an even performance, right? And we've seen Zamula play well. So if it's kind of an even performance, you're like, okay, well, we can hold on to Zamula, give him his shot, and then we'll bring up Andre later because somebody's going to get hurt. Yeah. And we're going to have that opportunity to bring him up.
And Andre getting top minutes, I mean, in the AHL isn't a bad thing. It isn't a bad thing for his development at all, right? Yeah. So, but yeah, I think there's a lot of stories right now, storylines in terms of Flyers camp. We're just got to see how it all unfolds. I think a week from now, things will probably be a lot clearer for us. So we'll just see what happens as the games go along, as camp kind of goes along here. Before we end off, I have 2 fun facts that I wanted to bring up.
Hit me.
They're very random, but it's always fun to end the episode off like this.
I love it.
I'm sure some fans saw this online, but Jakub Voracek is going to be the assistant coach for Jaromir Jagr's Kladno in the Czech league. So that's really cool for Voracek to kind of stick around the game. I mean, it's unfortunate that he had to end his career due to, the post-concussion syndrome. The concussions are no joke, obviously. And, we wish the best to Voracek.
An all-time Flyers great.
I agree. Definitely. But yeah, it's cool to see Voracek, coaching, and I wonder if he eventually ends up trying to coach in North America at some point in the future. That would be kind of cool.
Would be
And then
cool.
this just happened earlier, actually, maybe like an hour ago. But Corey Schneider has announced his retirement from the NHL. So
Okay.
yeah,
That one
so
makes sense.
yeah, I mean, he's been an AHL goalie for the last like 4 or 5 seasons. It's kind of crazy though, and this is a stat that I just saw randomly. But his first 6 full seasons in the league, Schneider led all goalies in save percentage, which is
Well, he
kind of
was
nuts.
traded for the 8th overall pick. I think it was the 8th overall pick, 8th or ninth
Yeah,
overall pick for what ended up being Bo Horvat,
yeah.
which was a great trade for them. Obviously not with the Vancouver Canucks anymore, but now with the Islanders. And again, that's a trade I would make for Carter Hart, top 10 pick. Like,
Yeah,
if we're gonna move
exactly.
Carter Hart, people are talking about like second round picks. No way, no
Yeah, that's
way. And
nuts. That's nuts.
look, I don't know what's gonna go on with this Canada investigation, but you don't move a guy this talented for a second round pick. What is the point of
No
that?
way.
Even Bobrovsky, who we didn't even know was going to be what he is today, I think we got 2 seconds for him, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, pretty sure.
So, no, thank you. I'd rather watch him fizzle out than trade him for an asset that can
Pennies
be,
on the dollar,
yeah,
essentially.
that can be had through other players. Like, you can get a second round pick for other players, not your star goaltender who
Yeah.
was in the NHL at the age of 21 as a starting goaltender. It's just like, okay, his game could drop off. I don't believe that. And, if you listen to what Danny Briere has been saying, he's like, he's our number one goalie. Like, they're not questioning his
I'm
skill.
interested to see how Hart starts because I mean he had a great start to the season last year. I'm kind of expecting the same type of deal, so we'll see, right? Once
Well,
he gets some game time here.
we'll see how the team plays defense in front of him.
That's true.
That's
That's
always
true.
the biggest thing, right? Any goalie who's good and the team doesn't play defensively well in front of him
Well,
will,
every goalie's as
like,
good as the defense in front of them. That's the
unfortunately.
time old saying, but
Yeah. And people don't want to mention that. I don't know why. People keep pretending like goaltenders are the savior, end all be all, but you look at the Stanley Cup winner and I'll challenge you to
they won
name.
with a backup
Yeah, I was
basically.
gonna say I'll
So
challenge you to name him right now.
Aiden Hill for
Yeah,
anybody that
I
doesn't
know
know.
you know, but yeah, it's just like, yeah, you do not need a star goaltender to win a Stanley Cup. You need great team defense to win a Stanley Cup and a good goaltender to win a Stanley Cup. If you have a great goaltender, it can help compensate for your defensive woes. But that's all it's really going to do. It's not going to be your end all be all. And if it is, it's an outlier in their career and they can do it once, maybe twice, but they're not going to do it every single season, short of being the best goaltenders of all time,
Yeah.
which we can name on pretty much one hand. So,
Well, I just say look at Carey Price and look at Lundqvist. Like they were great goaltenders. They brought their team to the finals, but at the end of the day, they were never able to win a cup, right? And I mean, if
yeah.
you look at those Rangers Montreal teams and you look at the defenses compared to the teams that they played in those finals, those other teams that beat them for the cup, their defenses were far superior.
I
So it just
mean,
shows overall
even
team game, right?
even Martin Brodeur, who was arguably the best goalie of all time.
Look at that Devils defense.
Look at that Devils defense. Like, you're just saying, like, they were
Hall of
ridiculous.
Famer after Hall of
And
Famer
they
on
and
that
they as
back
a
end.
team played very stingy defense. They were a
Yeah.
boring ass team to watch. And I'm not gonna say they made things easy on him, but they definitely allowed him to excel. And also his ability to move the puck. And obviously we have the trapezoid today pretty much because of Brodeur. So
Yeah.
look, and again, he's an outlier. He's a 1%er of all time. So, defense matters.
Definitely.
And that's what they mean when they say build from the defense out is defense. The forwards are also included in that. They also need to play defense. They also need to play well, keep the shots to the outside,
Keep the structure.
limit the second chances, right? Which we saw the other day. They did not do that for Petersen. Like, that was not the case. Once they get the puck around the net, they swarmed, they pushed our defense around. And that was an undersized defense, especially at the top pairing. I brought it up in the pregame. You got two guys who are 5'11". This is why Risto is probably going to play with York.
And Emil Andre, as well as the small guys too.
Right, 5'8". Yeah, he plays with Helge Grans, but Grans is not ready for the NHL. So, is what it is. All right. I think we're done with this one. Vasili, anything you want to let people know about before we sign off here?
Yeah, so as the season ramps up, I'm gonna, have articles coming out for Daily Faceoff, so check that stuff out. About halfway through training camp here, we're not there yet. I'm gonna get my season preview articles and just some Flyers related articles up for FlyersNittyGritty.com. So keep an eye out for that stuff. And just thanks to everybody for continuing to listen. For continuing to check out Flyers Nitty Gritty website and everybody who's writing and putting content up on the site. We appreciate everybody's support and just sticking with us. And as the season goes along, we're gonna up our content here on the YouTube side as well, and try to get some more out for you all. So keep an eye out, and it's gonna be a fun season ahead.
Oh yeah. Again, I'll just repeat what I said at the beginning of the show. Please like, subscribe, share, go to iTunes, go to Spotify, follow us, sign up, subscribe to us, give us a rating if you can. All that stuff is incredibly helpful. Keep the comments coming. We love it. I'm trying to respond to everything that comes in. Vasili's trying to respond to everything that comes in. So if we missed your comment, sorry, keep commenting. We'll keep trying to do that.
We'll respond at some point.
We're definitely trying to respond to all of them. So if I missed a couple, I apologize. But yeah, we love you guys. I mean, it's been amazing. And we're going to keep this going. And the Flyer season's is here. It's here. We got a lot to talk about, and we're going to have more to talk about. And we'll have a lot to review as the preseason rolls on. And I'm excited, dude. I'm super pumped for the season. I'm always pumped. I don't care for the worst team in the league. I'll get excited for the draft.
Hey man, I just like to watch hockey, and the fact that we can watch Flyers hockey is a great thing. I'm sure the fans feel the same way. And just hockey in general, like I love being able to, after work, you turn on, even if the Flyers aren't playing, a couple of good teams playing, you get to watch a good game. You can't go wrong. So
love it. That's how you know you're a hockey fan.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We love you. And remember, always stay gritty.